Hello, I'm Keith, and this is my dad, Kerwin. Welcome back to Father and Son, a Star Wars podcast. Thanks for joining us. We're continuing the series where we celebrate the Academy Award-winning composer John Williams, who turns 90 years old in February.
Our guest for this episode is a legend in classical music. For 40 years, Anne Hobson Pilot was a principal harpist for the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the first African-American to perform in the orchestra. Ms. Pilot's extensive solo career includes performances with orchestras in Europe, Haiti, New Zealand, and South Africa. She is a recipient of the honorary Doctor of Music degree at Tufts University. Her numerous awards include an honorary Doctor of Fine Arts degree from Bridgewater State College, the Distinguished Alumni Award from the Cleveland Institute of Music, the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Boston Musicians Association, and the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Talent Development League of the Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. Anne Hobson Pilot, welcome to Father and Son, a Star Wars podcast.
Thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Thank you. We are so glad to have you. When I was researching your life story, I was excited to learn that you were actually born and raised in Philadelphia. I'm a Temple grad, so I lived in Philadelphia for a good number of years. Where in Philadelphia did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in West Philly. Then we lived in Germany for close to 4 years. My father was in the Army. And then when we came back, we moved into, oddly enough, Germantown.
Familiar with that area. Yes.
So you started learning music playing the piano. What made you want to teach the harp?
Well, my mother was a concert pianist and my older sister played the piano. And basically I wanted an instrument of my own. You know, I wanted to be different, something that was different, especially all my friends, if they played anything, they usually played the piano. So when I went to the school, I went to the Philadelphia High School for Girls, which offered all of the orchestral instruments. And when I spoke to the teacher at the school, I explained that I was going to switch from piano to another instrument. And she said, why not try the harp? Because it's similar reading treble and bass clef. You use both hands. And so I said, sure, I'll give it a try. And so that's how I started the harp. And from the first day, I really loved it and enjoyed it.
Some of your earliest performances were playing the harp for pop musicians and pop singers. What are some of the pop singers that you played with?
Well, the first one was Johnny Mathis. So I started the harp when I was 14, but when I was 18 and a student at the Philadelphia Musical Academy, I was asked if I'd be interested in performing with the orchestra or small group of players that was accompanying Johnny Mathis at the Latin Casino in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And I mean, if they asked me today, I would say yes. But when I was 18, I was ecstatic to play behind Johnny Mathis. So it was a real thrill. And I also accompanied Andy Williams and Peggy Lee and some other artists.
Tell us about your mentor, Edna Phillips Rosenbaum. How did you meet her and how did she change the direction of your career?
Well, when I started the harp at Girls High, the harp world is very small, especially in Philly. And she took an interest in all of the students there. And my teacher at the time, Mary Ann Castaldo, was a student of hers. Mary Ann Castaldo told Edna Phillips about me. And she really took an interest in me and met me and even gave me a few lessons. And then she was interested in me going to Cleveland to study with Alice Shalafoo, who was a very famous harp teacher at the time at the Cleveland Institute of Music. So she was on the board of the Philadelphia Foundation and arranged for me to get a full tuition scholarship to Cleveland Institute.
And in 1966, you were offered the job of principal harpist with the Washington National Symphony Orchestra. And there you broke the color barrier and became the first African-American to perform in the symphony. You were there for 3 years during the height of racial tension in America. What did you experience during those years in regards to discrimination, and how were you able to stay focused with your work?
Well, yes, I was the first and only African-American at that time. The discrimination existed mostly outside of the orchestra. The orchestra being in Washington, when we toured, we mostly toured down south. I mean, there was no reason to go north when you had the Philadelphia Orchestra, the New York Phil, or the Boston Symphony. So we would go south. And that's when some of the issues arose, where as far as eating in restaurants, and even they had to get special permission for me to stay in the hotels where the orchestra stayed. But as far as my colleagues there, I knew that there were some players that were not happy that I was there, but I never really had any disagreements with anyone in the 3 years that I was there.
And Arthur Fiedler, who was the well-known conductor of the Boston Pops at the time, substituted for the conductor there at the National Symphony. He was a guest conductor. And afterwards, you had a meeting with Arthur Fiedler, and he mentioned that there was an opening for a harpist on the Boston Pops. Now, you must have admired your work, and I'm sure he admired it so much that he wanted to initiate a meeting with you. What did he say about your performance? What did he enjoy about your performance as a harpist?
Well, he had been guest conducting the National Symphony at least 2 out of the 3 years that I was there. So he knew my playing by that point. And they had actually had an audition for the Boston Symphony and the Boston Pops. And they were not happy with the finalists, which he knew, and he wasn't happy with them. So he liked my playing, and thought it was a good idea for me to come to take the audition. There was going to be another set of auditions coming up I guess it was the following year. So I spoke to my teacher and to some other people who basically said that the Washington National Symphony, wonderful as it is, will never be the BSO. So they recommended that I go and apply and audition for it. And that was during the days, had just started auditioning behind the screen. I'm sure you've heard of that. And so I went there and took off my high-heeled shoes so they wouldn't tell I was a woman, and it was all behind a screen. And actually, when I played, the committee, which was behind the screen and couldn't see who was playing, asked the question, "Is that the same harp that everybody else is playing?" Which, of course, they said yes. So I assumed that was a compliment, and I guess it was, because they offered me the job.
And behind the screen, the idea was that they couldn't see who the person was performing. So the only thing that they can monitor in regards to the performance is at the actual performance, not the person who's playing the actual instrument. So that way to avoid discrimination. Is that the idea of the behind the screen? Exactly.
Back in that year was 1969. And back then, I mean, the orchestras were 98% white males. And they knew that they would have to open that up and start having women and, people of color, hopefully. So that was their way of trying to be fair about it, that have everybody behind a screen, and that therefore there could be no discrimination. And interestingly enough, though, what ended up happening when I joined the BSO in 1969, I was one of 4 or 5 women. And after about 10 years, well, let's say now, there are about 40 women, but still 1 person of color.
Mm.
So for some reason, it increased the number of women, but not necessarily the people of color yet. I think that with groups like Project Step and Sphinx, I think that that all of that will eventually change, though it has been a long time.
So you auditioned for the job at the BSO, and you were offered the job. Did you accept the position immediately, or did you want to give it some time to think about it?
Well, I did not accept it because I was principal harp in Washington. And this was basically, it was principal with the pops, but it was basically second harp with the BSO. And so I did not accept it at first, but then they sweetened the pie a bit and made me assistant principal harp. And then when the principal harpist left in 1980, they decided to make me principal harp. They just moved me into the position without hiring a second harpist for me. So I was the only harpist under contract.
At the age of 26, you became the first African American to join the BSO. Tell us about your experience working with the BSO.
Well, the BSO was such a wonderful institution, and so I expected the same kind of treatment that I got in Washington, which was basically respect and not finding any difficulty with my colleagues. But I think it was last year for the first time, I tell the story on my TED Talk of my first day on the job. I don't know if you heard that story, where I went to the first rehearsal, and I got there early because I wanted to tune up and warm up and all of that. And this older man came rushing up to me, and I expected him to say, "Welcome to the orchestra," or some such polite thing. Instead, he said, "You must fry some mean chicken." And I looked at him and said, "Excuse me?"
Yeah.
And he said it again and again. And finally, I mean, I didn't really know what to say. And finally, I said something probably ridiculous, like, "Well, as a matter of fact, I do." But every time I saw him after that, he had to say something regarding race, like, "Well, I used to play in the Porgy and Bess Orchestra, and all of the Black folks had to go in the rear door," and things like that. So I knew that whenever he saw me, all he saw was color. But and other things happened. Like I was once called the N-word in front of a bunch of people, and I took the guy aside the next day and I said, "Don't you ever use that word in front of me again." And he said, "Well, I was just making a joke. Richard Pryor uses it all the time." And I said, "You're not Richard Pryor, and I don't expect you to ever use that again." He apologized and fortunately never did use it again. So there were issues like that. And I think it really helped being a woman, because there wasn't the confrontation that two men might have had. And I think in the end, I was able to hold my own and was respected the entire time that I was there. So that was good.
Mm-hmm. And, when you hear those rude comments over time, they must have been, obviously hurtful for you, but, you didn't allow that to stop you from continuing to be the best harpist that you could be in that orchestra. But I'm wondering, as an outlet, when you hear those stories, or you experience those stories or those jokes from people, who do you talk to? I mean, who did you have at the time to lean on to just talk about your day and to just vent about what happened, and then let it out, let it go, and then get back to work the next day?
Well, back then, I don't think that was before I met my husband. We got married in 1980. So back then, I kind of really didn't have anyone. I didn't talk about it with my parents. I basically didn't talk about it with anyone. But I mean, I think it's funny. I think it's funny. And to this day, I think it's funny that someone could be so ignorant to say something like that. And if you can approach it with a sense of humor, then it takes some of the sting out of it. Then in 1978, I met my husband, who's a musician also. He played string bass, which he was playing with a little jazz group when I met him. And then he also started playing with the Boston Pops. And he played with the Esplanade Pops for 22 years. So he knew all of the players that I knew. So there was definitely a shoulder to lean on and someone to talk to about it after that.
What was it like working with Arthur Fiedler?
Arthur Fiedler was a character, a real character. He obviously was wonderful for the Boston Pops. He's the one that started the Boston Pops and introduced a lot of people to classical music. But he was a character. I remember my first day. I mean, I had worked with him in Washington, as I said, but when he came to guest conduct an orchestra, he was different than he was with his own Boston Pops. So my first day at the Boston Pops rehearsal, I was sitting there and all of a sudden I saw a paper airplane fly across the room and then another one. So, I mean, the people in the Pops loved to rib him and to tease him and to give him a hard time. And he would always, get hysterical and storm off the stage. And so it was a real interesting time with Arthur Fiedler.
Well, Arthur Fiedler passed away in 1979. And by 1980, you were the principal harpist for both the BSO and the Boston Pops. And then came a new principal conductor. How was John Williams received as the new conductor of the Pops? And did the musicians believe he was a good fit for the Pops?
I think it took a while for them to appreciate him. I mean, I did. I appreciated him from day one. I could see, such a difference from Arthur Fiedler, that he definitely had the respect of the players, but some of the players thought they thought that they were better than having to play Pops music. That's kind of what was going on with Fiedler. So when John Williams came, he of course played a lot of his own music. And some of them looked down on that. They thought they should be playing Beethoven and Bach and Brahms all the time. But so he had a little difficulty at first, but I think eventually the players realized who he is and what he's done as far as music is concerned, as far as film music is concerned, and just music in general. So he definitely has a lot of respect now. And even at coming up on 90 years old, as you know, he still goes back to Boston to guest conduct the orchestra and to Tanglewood. So I think it's just incredible.
What are your favorite collaborations with John Williams?
Well, of course, my real favorite one is when he wrote the harp concerto for me on Willows and Birches. That actually came from Jimmy Levine, who was the music director at the time of the BSO. I had decided I wanted to retire from the BSO. In about 2007, I went to Jimmy and explained that I was going to retire. And he said he really hoped I would stay at least for a few years because he was taking the orchestra on a European tour in 2008 and was taking some Mahler symphonies along that he have a lot of harp. And so he really hoped that I would stay. So I agreed to stay through 2009. And he was so happy about that he said to me, "What would you like for a retirement gift?" And I said, I thought about it and said, I think it would be nice to have another harp concerto written, because at the time there were not a lot of them. And he said, who would you like to write it? And again, I thought, and then I said, John Williams. And we asked John, or he asked John, we asked John. And John said, I couldn't possibly do that. The harp is too difficult to write for and all. But we finally convinced him. And I mean, it was such a wonderful experience for me to be able to work with him one-on-one. He doesn't do email. He doesn't email people. So, but he does do snail mail. So when we had to collaborate on, he had a lot of questions. Well, will this work? Will that work? He would send me some mail and ask those questions. I would run to the mailbox and there's another letter from John Williams. And that was always very exciting. And one of them he signed, you know, I'm your biggest fan.
Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Yes, on Willows and Birches. Were there any other compositions written by John Williams or performed by the BSO Orchestra that you're also excited to play, or were one of your favorites?
Well, one of my favorites is Schindler's List, because he wrote such an extensive harp part. So Itzhak Perlman, of course, was the soloist there, but he wrote a very nice harp part. As a matter of fact, he called my home and explained that he was going to write this extensive harp part. So I was made aware of it in advance. And even now, I sometimes, I had an arrangement written for just violin and harp of Schindler's List music. And even now, I love to play that piece. It's such a beautiful piece.
Beautiful piece, yes. And just going back to when you retired in 2009, you did retire after 40 years of performing with the Boston Symphony. And you mentioned about the concerto that John Williams wrote for you called On Willows and Birches. Can you take us back to that evening when you first performed that concerto? How was it? How did you feel?
Well, as I said, I worked with John on it both remotely with his letters, and then a few weeks before the performance, we got together, and I played the piece for him. And there's even a little film clip on the film with me and John Williams and Jimmy Levine conducting. As a matter of fact, can you see this picture here?
Yes.
You can, with Jimmy and John. Yeah. And but about a week before the performance, I said to John, as we were working on it, I said, you know, I think I'm going to try to play this from memory. And he was absolutely floored. He said, you're going to do what? And I said, yeah, because it's just so complicated on the harp with trying to turn pages in addition to everything else you have to worry about, the pedals and, you know, all of that. So it also makes me feel as if I know the piece better if I don't have to worry about the music. So he, of course, came to the opening night performance, which was at Symphony Hall. And he might have been more nervous than I was of expecting me or hoping that I wouldn't forget. But it went really beautifully, and he seemed to be very, very happy afterwards. And of course, the next performance was at Carnegie Hall. And unfortunately, Jimmy had gotten ill and was not able to conduct that. So they used Daniele Gatti, but that also went very well. It was obviously very exciting for me and thrilling to be able to play a piece by John Williams that no one else had ever played at that point.
It's truly an honor. Wow, what an accomplishment.
You're also a music teacher. Please tell us about Project STEP and other ways you're training students of color to perform classical music.
Yes, Project STEP is a string training program. So it's really only for, even though the harp is more strings than any other instrument, 47 strings, it's not considered a string instrument. String instruments are considered such, those that use a bow. So violin, viola, cello, and bass. were all part of Project STEP. And as a matter of fact, my husband was the first artistic administrator of Project STEP. And he was able to find young, talented Black kids who did not have the ability to get a very good instrument or get a very good teacher. And so that was the start of Project STEP back in, I think it was 81 or 82. And it's still going strong. They've had some very successful students that have come out of it. And also the other organization that I really respect is the Sphinx organization, which is, I think they were influenced by Project STEP. So it's a little bit newer, but they also they also stick mainly with string players. And the reason these kind of groups stick with string players is because string players, of course, is the largest body of instruments in a symphony orchestra. And they're trying to train young people to be symphony musicians.
You know, my two sons are actually learning to play instruments for the first time this year. Keith is learning the flute, and my younger son, Maceo, is learning to play the cello.
Oh, wonderful.
What advice could you give these aspiring musicians?
Well, I guess the best word is practice. Just continue to practice. And if you find you really enjoy it, that's why I became successful as a harpist, because I really enjoyed practicing the harp. I did not enjoy practicing the piano when I was young, and so I was not successful at it. But, you know, it is no secret that the music just isn't going to pop into your head and your hands. You have to really work at it, just as you do anything, you know, sports, you know, those, do you like sports, Keith?
Sort of.
Okay.
Not really a sports person, but I do enjoy basketball and football.
I enjoy basketball very much. And so we were watching Steph Curry last night trying to break Ray Allen's record. And you could see him before the game shooting one three-pointer after another. And that's the kind of practice I'm talking about, that you really have to prepare yourself. And if you want to pursue music, then that's the best word I can think of.
Now, I understand that you will never retire from playing the harp. So what is next for you? Do you have any upcoming projects?
Well, I actually did a project with Sarasota Contemporary Dance, where we played the music of Piazzolla, Astor Piazzolla, an Argentinian composer whose music I fell in love with basically right after I retired from the BSO. And unfortunately, he didn't write for harp. So I had a former student of mine, Michael Maganuco, wrote some arrangements for violin and harp and flute and harp. And then we added a bandoneon. Keith, do you know what a bandoneon is?
Nope.
It's like an accordion. They call it like a button accordion. Instead of having keys on the side, it has buttons on the side. And it's an Argentinian instrument. It was actually the instrument that Piazzolla played. So we got a trio together for violin, bandoneon, and harp. And we did, it actually turned into a film of music to accompany the dancers from Sarasota Contemporary Dance. Mm-hmm. And that was very exciting for me. And she wants to do it again in various cities. So that would be my next project at this point. After I retired from the BSO, I decided to pursue more the music of Astor Piazzolla, whose music I had always loved. Lamus heard, who's the director of the Sarasota Contemporary Dance, and she was all excited about the music. So she choreographed an entire evening of dancing to this music. This performance was one of the things I enjoyed most in all of my however many years of playing, because it was so much fun working with the dancers and just being absolutely astounded at their abilities and how they coordinated with the music of Piazzolla.
And this has been truly an honor to speak with you. You are definitely a legend. In my opinion, I believe you're an unsung hero, and that there should be more books written about you. My hope for this interview is that people get to see it or listen to it and know how much you've contributed to American music.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. So we are really, truly honored to have you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Where can people find you?
I'm sorry, you said what?
Where can people find you?
You have a website?
I have a website, hobsonpilot.com. And there's also some YouTube videos about me. I think if you just put in Ann Hobson Pilot Harpist, you can find them.
Okay.
Absolutely. And then Keith, where can people find us?
Well, you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Radio Public, Amazon Music, Audible, Spreaker, or wherever you get your podcast.
Yes, and we also have a YouTube channel. If you are not a subscriber, please do so. If you like the material that we provide, please subscribe. We're also on Facebook. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Once again, Ann Hobson.
Wait, don't forget our website, FathersonGalaxy.com.
That is correct. Once again, thank you very much, Ann Hobson Pilot, legendary harpist for the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. And very, very nice to meet you both.
All right. Thank you. Happy holidays to you. Until next time, everyone, take care, and we will see you again.